Good morning and welcome to Morning Movie News. Well, it looks like that galaxy far, far away certainly is getting crowded, not just in front of the camera with multiple casting announcements, but also behind the camera as yet another director is signed on to do a spin-off. This is a lot of spin-offs. I'm surprised they're so aggressively going after that secondary market before they've established their primary line of movies, the through line, which everything else is going to spin off of course. And that's the films that JJ Abrams will be directing, episode 7, 8, and 9. But they have two spin-offs planned now, one with Gareth Edwards at the helm. As we recall, that story broke just after Godzilla's monster box office first weekend. And now they have another director, Josh Trank, that they've signed over there, Kathleen Kennedy, who's heading up Lucasfilm for Disney. I did a piece on her. She's very close with both Spielberg and George Lucas, so she was a great choice for that position. Or was she? These are very interesting and I think controversial directing choices. Gareth Edwards, because while the visuals on Godzilla were stellar, a lot of people have had complaints about the story elements, and the film has dropped considerably every weekend since, at about the 60th percentile. Never a great sign, although as you'll see later today, the toys are selling well, which always makes Hollywood a little bit more at ease. That'll be the third story of the day that some of you asked me to cover, toys, so stay tuned for that. But, and Star Wars, of course, is a huge toys franchise, because that's how George Lucas made all of his money. That Fox didn't know how big merchandising would be back then when the first Star Wars came out, and as kind of, a way to get rid of Lucas, they said, okay, you can have the merchandising rights. And of course, they were so lucrative that Lucas was able to build an entire empire. LucasArts, all of his Industrial Light and Magic, his ranch, all of that was funded with Star Wars merchandising money. But now we have a new generation of filmmakers. Now, of course, also speaking of toys, Lucas was famous for not letting anyone else play with his. But now that he's given his toy chest to Kathleen Kennedy, she has no problem. She doesn't want to play with the toys herself. She's looking to, to give it out to other kids to play with, almost like a Star Wars charity. And so the question becomes, is she making the right choices? Now, I think the overwhelming through line for both announcements with Gareth Edwards and Josh Trank has been that they are fans of the franchise. And I think that fandom is a double-edged sword when it comes to creative talent behind the camera or in front of the camera. Can these people control their fandom and use that power for good? Or get a little too meta and not be able to step back and judge the material unbiasedly. So we'll see what happens. Again, I said Gareth Edwards, there are some problems there. Kathleen Kennedy signed him before she saw how Godzilla performed in the long run. And Josh Trank, she's also taking a gamble on because she's signing him before she sees how Fantastic Four is received. It's filming right now. And as you might recall, I covered a scoop from Bleeding Cool a couple of months ago, I think at this point, that said that Fox was trying to get rid of Josh Trank, at the last minute to get another director to step in because they weren't happy with him and they weren't so happy with his casting choices, which I think a number of people have expressed some concern in. Our whole Fantastic Four babies discussion. Fox, of course, when that report came out on Bleeding Cool, very aggressively refuted it, as I think they needed to do, because they weren't able to replace Josh Trank, and they need to make sure that this film does not have a bad image before anything else comes out about it. Any set leaks, any trailers, any official leaks from the set, they have to try and keep that spin machine going in the positive direction. But Bleeding Cool stood by its story, and I very strongly believe Bleeding Cool because of where they get their leaks from. For instance, their defense of the story of Josh Trank being replaced was, I think, very telling, and they said, well, if Fox doesn't want people to think they're trying to replace Josh Trank, they should stop calling up directors, agents, and making the offer to have them come in and take over. And so I think that Fox kind of just got caught there in an awkward situation, and of course, who knows what production executive decided to make the call. It could have been higher up at Fox. It's just one individual, and of course, they not only had a bad, stroke of luck in that they were turned down by the person they approached, but somebody in that person's office leaked the story to Bleeding Cool. And that's the same thing with the Marvel, downplaying Fox's properties, X-Men and Fantastic Four. Bleeding Cool got those leaks from within Marvel. People were very upset. They felt it was a horrible thing to do, so they leaked internal memos that Bleeding Cool put up on their website to try and have some sense of justice. That's the thing. Bleeding Cool stories usually come from some sense of justice by someone who is upset or wronged within a company and has no way to. They're powerless to do anything themselves, and they know that Bleeding Cool will run the story because they don't fear retribution from the big studio that, they don't need to get the story from them. So, leaks therefore have become the bread and butter of Bleeding Cool. So they protect them very carefully and are very careful about, they don't irresponsibly report them like some other websites that I feel do. So that's why I don't report those stories. But I feel very, I've had my own previous relationship with Bleeding Cool, so I feel very strongly. I know the people who run it, and I know that they know what they're doing. So Josh Trank, they couldn't find anyone to take over because it was so late in the game, and so he gets to continue. And I liked Chronicle, but I was talking with this yesterday when the news broke about him taking over Star Wars, and of course, let's not forget that Chronicle was a found footage movie. That's a very different set of rules creatively, and I think it's a genre that's a little more forgiving because it's supposed to be amateur photography. You don't have to have the writing and the through line narratively doesn't have to be as strong because there's distance that's put between the viewer and the characters by the lens of a camera. And also, of course, I think Dane DeHaan was a huge part of the success of Chronicle, and I think a huge part of the success of The Amazing Spider-Man 2, or whatever success that film says it can enjoy. I think Dane DeHaan is quite talented. So we'll see Josh Trank. Maybe he'll do a better job with casting for whatever Star Wars spinoff he's doing. But I just think it's interesting to be so heavily betting on these spin-offs before we see how JJ Abrams does with Episode 7. That's going to be the spine of this new Star Wars cinematic universe, Episodes 7, 8, and 9. So to have 2 spin-offs already planned, that just shows how aggressive that Star Wars is going to be. Lucasfilm and Disney, how much they're going to put it in the marketplace. And people are saying it's going to be as prolific as Marvel Studios. Of course, the other big production arm of the Disney Studios. They also paid $4 billion for. Yes, that's right. That's insane that Disney can just continue to write these checks. We just marvel at it. I think they paid about the same, I believe, for Pixar as well. So that's, I think, a very well spent $12 billion, though, when you look at the bottom lines. But I think that as much as they might want to get the same amount of films out of there, I'm a little nervous about having so many movies. First of all, can Disney promote so many films? And I also think that Star Wars, maybe not everything has to be like Marvel, where you build out all these different characters. Maybe that this can be the one amazing film a year or every other year. I think that would be just as viable, and then Disney can make up what revenue might be lost off of spin-off films with intense merchandising, theme parks. There's talk about building significantly more rides in all the Disney theme parks based on Star Wars. So I think that the difference could be, very well made up there. And oversaturation is always a fear. But the one good thing that I think might be interesting is the directors they've chosen, I think, work very well with low budgets. Godzilla was surprisingly low budget. Chronicle, of course, was low budget. I don't think we really know the numbers for sure on Fantastic Four yet, or the results, so it's hard to judge that film. But I think that it's interesting that Star Wars, for their spin-off film, seems to be going in the low-budget direction. And we talked about that yesterday with Doctor Strange as well, that Scott Derrickson was a low-budget choice. So I think this is an interesting turn of events for the blockbuster, and it'll be interesting to see if it affects how it performs at the box office. Does a low budget, you need the big budgets to get the big box office performances? I'm not quite sure, but I do think the one thing that's the silver lining here is that I think we're all pleased to see the practical special effects that JJ Abrams seems to be implementing in Star Wars Episode 7, and these other low-budget directors might be asked to do the same thing. And I think they would want to. I think it's a really great idea. So I think it'll be very interesting to see how these two directors handle it, the question of their fandom, if that they will use that for good or bad, and if Disney's being too aggressive in the space. So I'm curious to what you guys think. I think that Star Wars has become a very difficult thing to interpret because of the somewhat lack of interest from audiences, and I think that the lack of, they're very good at controlling leaks. I don't know if that's going to be to their detriment over there at Lucasfilm, Disney Lucasfilm, but I don't see quite the excitement that I think that that I would even expect. I still don't see it materializing. And even over these spin-offs, I think it's not the excitement people see. Maybe this franchise just needs to prove itself again, and that's JJ Abrams' biggest hurdle. So I'm curious, how do you feel about the Josh Trank news? Do you think he's a great choice? Or do you think Kathleen Kennedy is doing a good job choosing who should play with her new set of toys? I myself am not quite sure, but I'm not sure in either direction, so that's why I'm asking you guys what you think. All right, so that's the first story of the day. The second story of the day is, wow, Lionsgate is doing a great job of keeping their Divergent franchise in the news. Of course, we've been discussing it a lot with Shailene Woodley. It came up yesterday as the viewer question on Morning Movie News, talking about why was Insurgent greenlit when Divergent wasn't as big a hit as perhaps expected. And so if you can check out that episode yesterday for my response to that. But in short, I just said it was largely, I think, to save face. Divergent made enough money that it's not ridiculous to make Insurgent. They'd already greenlit the properties. And I think that you also have a situation where Lionsgate really needs another franchise. They can't be a one-franchise studio, which, of course, is the Hunger Games, because that is going to come to an end. It's not going to be like the Star Wars movies. You know, they don't have a evergreen franchise, you know, like DC is supposed to be for Warner Brothers, Marvel is for Disney, the fairy tales. Disney's very good at evergreen franchises. That's, I think, a big part of their success. But Lionsgate and Summit, which is now their subsidiary, Twilight came to an end, Hunger Games has to come to an end, and even Divergent, even though they've announced that they're going to split the last book into two, Allegiant, it will also come to an end. And so perhaps they need to, that's what maybe the development execs at Lionsgate should be looking for, an evergreen franchise. But anyway, they got it in the news yesterday, and I think this was great to help out The Fault in Our Stars to some degree. But they announced they're, of course, filming Insurgent right now, and they've cast Naomi Watts as Four's mother, Evelyn, who is one of the leaders of the Factionless. And in my coverage of the upcoming Insurgent film, I talked about how this is a very big role. I don't want to give any spoilers away, but it's crucial. It's a crucial role, and I think it'll be much bigger than what Kate Winslet did in the first film, Divergent. But I think Naomi Watts, of course, does somewhat fill in for Kate Winslet. I think it's interesting they chose an actress who looks kind of similar to Kate Winslet, but maybe they might be changing her dramatically with her hair, etc. But I don't think, you know, it's not like the Capitol and the Hunger Games. They aren't known for these crazy fashion choices. But the reason I mention it is I think Julianne Moore has really been helped significantly by the bold visual choices they've made for her character as President Coin in the Hunger Games Mockingjay Part 1 and 2. I think that goes a long way to making her really pop as a character and make it seem like a big deal. Naomi Watts, I don't know. I think I really liked Divergent. You might recall from my review, I thought it was surprisingly good. I'm excited to see where the franchise goes. I think it's very well realized. And Naomi Watts, we'll see. I mean, as I said, it's an important role. We'll see what she does with it. She has to compete with Julianne Moore, Meryl Streep in The Giver. But I think so far, to date, we'll see what Julianne Moore does. None of these, you know, name actors, William Hurt and the host, have really done a lot to, you know, elevate the material. Just their presence there makes it a little more legitimate. But I don't think any of us have walked out of these movies being like, wow, you know, the acting done by that actor was some of their best work. You know, it seems like paycheck acting to some degree. And they're not, but, you know, even to the actor's credit, they're not really given meaty roles. Like, what did Kate Winslet really have to do in Divergent, except just be like, hey, Kate Winslet's in this movie, she vouches for it. So we'll see. Lionsgate, interestingly, also in their discussion of casting Naomi Watts in Insurgent, has talked about the fact that they predict that Insurgent will see a 27 to 40% increase in box office from Divergent, which is currently at 266. It's rising. It's still playing in theaters in some places all across the globe. So the Hollywood industry is predicting it'll end about 275. But for some reason, Lionsgate feels a 27 to 40% push for Insurgent. We'll see if that's true. I don't know where they're getting those numbers from. Maybe they are hoping that The Fault in Our Stars will raise Shailene Woodley's star power. But, you know, they have to remember that when Insurgent comes out, Mockingjay will still exist. And I think that that's the biggest threat to the Divergent franchise's box office, and that's that there's a bigger, bolder franchise that was there first already in play. So I think that Divergent, no matter what it does or how good it is, to some degree just comes off as the light version. So we'll see. I hope that Lionsgate is right. I think they're a very interesting studio, and I think that they have done the impossible, or the seemingly impossible, and elevated themselves almost to the level of the other old-time studios, of course, way back from the filmmaking in Hollywood was first started. So it just shows that it can be done. You know, Open Road and such, and those other small shingles distributors haven't been able to jump to the next level, but Lionsgate Summit has, and I think that's very impressive. So, as I said, their next step, get that evergreen franchise. All right, today's third story. A couple of you actually sent me this article in the New York Post. Digital Leonardo sent me it via an email last night, so I couldn't find the other person who sent it to me. I think it might have been Nicholas Yanes. I'm not sure. But thank you for those of you who brought this to my attention. It is indeed a very interesting article. And the New York Post talked about the fact that the stock prices for some toy manufacturers has gone down because movie action figure sales are not good. specifically for The Amazing Spider-Man 2, Captain America the Winter Soldier, and Transformers, which is yet to be released. All of those films aren't seeing a lot of movement in the toy aisle. And of course, the executives at both the movie studios and the toy companies are scratching their heads. But again, I think if they were to just go and do some informal polling of fans, they would get some very easy answers as to why this isn't working. Well, their theory, though, we'll discuss what they're thinking first. And what they're saying, the excuse that the industry's come up with, is that these are sequels. So kids already have their toys. They already have their Spider-Man toys, their Captain America toys, their Transformers toys. They don't need new ones. And so that's why something like new properties like Frozen and, of course, Godzilla, which has been rebooted. It's been absent, I think, from the mainstream toy industry for a long time. That's why those properties are doing well. And that's great to see that Godzilla is selling well as a toy. I had problems with the film, but I really like the monster aspects of it, and I would love to see Godzilla succeed for Warner Brothers and Legendary. And of course, Frozen's made so much money at this point. It's hard to hate something that's just brought so much joy to so many people. I just worry about Frozen's long-term damage. But that's a whole other discussion. But that's why I continue to have a little bit of a thing about Frozen, because I just worry about it could be very dangerous to Disney's legacy going forward. But anyway, back to these action figures. So that's what they're saying. Everybody already has their toys. Nobody wants new ones. I don't think that's the case. I occasionally like to go to Toys R Us and, FAO Schwartz and stuff and all the different toy stores and just walk around and see what's up, what's for sale, what are people looking at. And I'm constantly disappointed in the way that toys are manufactured. I don't understand, do they do focus groups at these toy companies? They always, for instance, put out they put out about 1 or 2 characters from the movie, usually just the lead hero and the lead villain. And then they put out a bunch of variations on that person's costume. Okay, this, and what they do. And they're like, oh, or sizes. Like, for instance, Man of Steel toys. I saw a whole bunch of different sizes of Superman. But, it's like, where's the Lois Lane action figure? Where's the Perry White action figure? Very little, they had Feora, I believe. But, they don't present figures that are conducive to a play scenario, in my opinion. You want the whole cast so that you can tell your own stories. You don't just want 1 or 2 characters. I think for some reason they believe that kids with action figures just like to carry them around in their stroller, just as kind of like a stuffed animal for boys. I don't think that's the case. And also, we've talked many a time here, female viewers, and as a female viewer myself of these movies, I get upset and frustrated with the lack of, female action figures. My favorite characters from those movies. Where are they? Now, actually, back when I was at Marvel, I asked their licensor why that was the case, and they said point blank, the toys just don't sell about female characters. And so it's hard to argue with those numbers, because even though we'd like to see them, but you know what, they don't sell because I think people aren't looking for them, and if no company's willing to take a risk and really try and push those female action figures, how will they ever know if they can make them sell? So it's a little frustrating to me. And I know to some of you as well. But that's what I think. I think that these toys are poorly made. I think that they don't capture kids' imaginations. And I think that they don't have, they should have a toy forget the variants. I want a toy of every single character in that movie. And I think that DC Direct is a much better toy company, but of course they're more fanboy, cultish. I don't think that the mainstream audience is aware of those action figures. And also those are meant more for display, even though they have amazing articulation, I think, sometimes, they're not really meant for play. And so I think that that's another reason they don't really help the mainstream market. But I wish that DC Direct would consider a line, in toy stores, like in Toys R Us and Walmart, and Target. Those are the big places that people buy toys today. I wish that we could get that kind of scope in the toy aisle. Instead, I just see a whole, every time I walk down, I just see a whole bunch of Spider-Mans, and they're missing a lot of the line. They don't have everything, and I think it's just crummy to wade through stuff and not get everything that you want. And what can you really do with just one Spider-Man? So I think that's the problem. And until toy companies are aggressive and try and worry about the experience, not just their bottom line that they're giving their customer, they're going to continue to see a drop. But of course, is there a Mark Wahlberg action figure, or are they just focusing on these Transformers? They said the licensing for Transformers is down like 50% or something for this 4th installment from the last one. And I think people just maybe feel it's an unknown commodity. They're not sure how it's going to perform. But, if all the Transformers toys look the same from all 4 movies, why would anyone buy another one? I don't know. It's just very frustrating to me as someone who grew up on action figures and toys, but had a hard time even then finding really good ones. All right, so that's the third story of the day. The viewer question comes from Jordy Mulder. And Jordy says, "Hi Grace, The last few years, I've seen trailers become so good that from watching a trailer alone, I think that every movie since the Titanic is worth watching. But after a few too many times of being tricked into expecting a great movie, but only getting one that is okay, I've come to distrust trailers, which is why your reviews of these trailers are so helpful. Thank you, Jordy. And so Jordy says, I have turned to watch sneak peeks where they show a scene instead. I feel like that is a more realistic preview of a movie. What is your view on this? Do you still trust trailers on face value? Hope you'll answer this question, Jordy. I did answer your question. Great question, Jordy. And of course, I think that's something we've discussed a lot about trailers here on the show. Not only do you guys feel that sometimes they are misleading, but that they show too much. It's been a problem, and I think that, Hollywood, of course, I think to some degree has mastered the trailer because they do such a good job, as Jordy has said. But perhaps it might be why you see a little bit of a backlash to films, why this summer has been not, I think, as exciting as people would have liked. And it does create a pall. When people are disappointed week after week, you'll see that we're going into June in a little bit of a dark space. And that's because people are like, how many times am I going to let Hollywood trick me before I decide just to stay home and get this at a cheaper rate that's less of a gamble when it comes out on streaming or demand? So, Hollywood, there is some repercussions for these bad trailers. But then, of course, a movie like Captain America, I think, does a great job of, reinvigorating the audience and feeling that there is quality out there. And that's why I think you see brand trust. That's why we've been talking so much about how it's important that Marvel maintain that brand trust and why a company like DC is trying to get it. But I don't know about your solution, Jordy, because that's the reason I picked this question, is that I felt I saw a number of clips from Maleficent. They showed a number of scenes, and I thought they were not good. Of course, when I saw them all together in the movie and how they cut together, they were great, and I was really impressed. So I felt that the movie did itself a disservice releasing those clips the way they were released. The other thing, though, is that you'll notice when they release clips, they're not the full clip. They've been heavily edited down. For instance, I think I saw a Transformers clip the other day. It might have been for Transformers. It might have been a different... I'm not sure what the movie was for again. Oh, no, yes. It was for Hercules. They showed a Hercules clip because I was looking around, seeing all the different Hercules videos that were up because my interest had been reinvigorated by the new trailer number 2. And I saw a clip. And I watched it, and you could clearly see that it had been edited down. Certain parts had been taken out, and they were really an abbreviated version of that scene. And as a result, it seemed like a really crappy scene. Very poor character development. Things seemed to move along at an odd pace, and it was disjointed. So I don't understand why they would release a scene like that just made it look like the movie was poorly made. When, I think a trained eye could notice, and some people, I think, from the comments didn't notice that it was edited. But I think a trained eye, not just someone who, like myself, but any viewer who watches movies regularly, I think can spot when something's been edited down in terms of its content to save something for the movie. But then don't release a clip. I think clips should be released in there entirely, but even then they're missing context. As I think, for instance, the Queen of the Moors clip that was released from Maleficent seemed really lame to me as just a standalone clip, but it was very powerful in the movie. So I think, what's the solution here? I think, obviously, the best solution is Hollywood would just make better movies. But I think that you need to, I think like we all do, sometimes we take a leap of faith with a movie, but I think we come to really trust talent, both in front of and behind the camera, producers, studios. I think that's a big part of it. And of course, I hope that I'm able to help you with my trailer reviews and my movie reviews. I try and get them up as fast as possible to let you know what I think of a movie. Again, it's just my opinion, and everybody, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Some movies I've liked that you've liked, or some movies I've liked that you haven't liked, and vice versa. But I think you just kind of want to, you want to get a feel for the situation and then decide how to spend your money. But of course, I've been there. I had a very bad slew of movies back when like Eat, Pray, Love was coming out that really turned me off from the movie-going experience, and I've been there. So just stay strong. I think we have a very good weekend coming up. I'm hearing good things about Edge of Tomorrow. Fault in Our Stars is supposed to be a very hot movie, obviously, but I think that next weekend, with both 22 Jump Street and How to Train Your Dragon 2, I think it will be hard to go wrong next weekend. And those are, by the way, some very good trailers for both those films that I do not think are misleading. Let's just see if they showed us the whole movie. All right, thank you so much for your question, Jordy. I hope that was helpful and at least moved the conversation along. I know we didn't come to a conclusion, but I don't know if there is one to be had at this time. But thank you so much, Jordy. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Please write down below what you think of today's top 3 stories and the viewer question, anything you'd like to see covered tomorrow, and any questions that you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.